Hello, everybody in the chat. Good morning, Cameron. Good morning, Adam. It's Thursday, the 29th. It will be May soon. Isn't that a meme? It's going to be May. You guys know this meme? Oh, let me show you a fresh meme. It's actually not a fresh meme, but it's going to be May. Well, I guess first of all, It's Gonna Be Me is an NSYNC song. Do you guys know what NSYNC is? Throwback boy band, but Justin Timberlake, before he was Justin Timberlake, he was a member of NSYNC. And then It's Gonna Be May was kind of a riff off of that song, It's Gonna Be Me, and now it has become associated with Justin Timberlake. So let's see some examples. I don't really know this website, but yeah, It's Gonna Be May. And then the end of April, you got Justin Timberlake, It's Gonna Be May. I feel like there are better ones than this, but I couldn't tell you exactly what they are. So in any case, this is the time of year where we get to use this meme because it's gonna be May. Okay, I think we're out. But I'll let you do your own meme research. I just wanna give you the tip about it's gonna be May. And it is gonna be May on what, this weekend, right? Mother's Day is coming. Not this weekend, but a week from Sunday. That's a holiday that might sneak up on you. So if you want to get a present for your mother, you might have to start planning that. My computer overheated? Sounds like it. It's kind of hot, right? Did you guys notice that? Yeah, I think it will rain and cool off a bit today, but yesterday was like 80 degrees, crazy. I went out for a walk, I put my jacket on, and I could not even wear the jacket, right? People were walking around in short sleeves, it was unbelievable. I was walking around in short sleeves. So in any case, just like Justin Timberlake would say, it is gonna be May, and you know, the weather's changing. We have 1 week left. I know it's been a long semester. We're all tired. I'm tired. You guys are tired. And we're almost there. You know, it's like I feel like I'm crawling at this point. I don't know about you guys. It's like at the beginning of the semester, I felt kind of energized. I was excited to see people again. Now I just need a vacation, to be honest. So it's almost here. Summer, it's on the way. And like I said, 1 more week. We've got, including this class, 3 classes, right? Which is really not very much. And obviously at this point, we can start to get nostalgic and feel like, oh, but the semester went so quickly, right? I'll miss you guys. And so there's also room for that too. We can feel both things, that we're both tired and kind of ready for a break. And also we can miss each other too. Let's see, are there things to talk about? I feel like we're pretty much on course, right? We're just gonna finish this book, write a paper about it. Some folks have emailed me about strategies for writing, which I'm happy to help you with. So even if you, well, I guess first I'll say, if you want to like talk about a draft, you can write something out. It doesn't have to be the full paper, and we can talk about your draft, right? That's probably the best way to do it, is you come with a little bit of writing, maybe an outline, some sort of plan, and then I can give you advice about how to turn it into a good paper. And the reason that's helpful, hey, Justin, is because I know this from experience. Whenever I write something and I think it's like pretty good, I show it to somebody and they're like, hey, but did you think about this? I'm like, no, I didn't think about that. That's amazing, right? And so whenever you write anything, it can always be better. It can always be sharper. It can always go a little deeper or a little wider or be nuanced in some way. And the way you figure that out is by showing it to somebody, right? Good writing is edited writing. This is something, I listen to podcasts. There's something called long form, which is basically like journalists talking to each other about journalism. And I'm not a journalist, but I like listening to them talk about writing because they're good writers. They're better writers than academics. And one thing I learned from them talking about writing is they all have editors who are very active. It's kind of an unbelievable process, right? The way that a newspaper is created every day. I don't know if you guys ever think about this, but somebody has to write all those articles, right? Every day. It's unbelievable. And then that goes through an editor, and the editor is actually quite active. And they say, chop this out, expand this, right? Redirect this, reorganize that. And so most of the best writers that I am aware of describe their path toward being a good writer through having a good editor, which again, you don't always necessarily see that, right? When you just get the newspaper, it's just the newspaper is the newspaper. I guess Jocelyn's involved in the newspaper. So Jocelyn, who's the editor for our newspaper? Is there like a... Okay, and does she have to like read everything and give feedback and that sort of thing?
Yeah, we have like the section editors and then copy editors, managing editors, and then editors.
There you go, right? And so it goes to show, even now, even the Manhattan College newspaper, the good writing comes from edited writing, right? And so the way we do that in this class is I will be your editor, right? You know, you could find other editors. There are resources at the library and various other writing centers and stuff like that too, but I can help, you know, so just let me know and I'm happy to work with you guys. Morning, Brielle. So, okay, that's enough of that, but yeah, do start thinking about your final papers. We'll finish this book next week. You can start writing even about at least a few of the prompts. One of them is toward the end of the book, and actually, I know at least one student has talked about Miss Akamoto. We haven't even met her yet, but you got basically, if you finish the book and you think she's interesting, you can start writing about her as well. Okay, but with that being said, why don't we jump in? Any questions about stuff before we get started? Okay, so last time we did There Is No Trash, and I hope you guys enjoyed that discussion. It's one thing I like about this image, this symbol, is there's so many layers to it, right? You know, we had kind of a nice conversation. I think I was sitting in this chair, right? And we were all kind of lined up in the middle here talking about trash. And on the most kind of surface level, it's just saying we should recycle, we should be careful with things like leaves, that, you know, we can use those in ways that we might not initially imagine. And say, okay, yeah, that's true. Recycling, that's good. And that's kind of the most surface level meaning of this image. And I think that is actually an interesting one, right? It makes you think, what is trash? How do you decide what is trash and what is not trash, right? And something we talked about too is rather than determining that something is trash kind of from its own side, right? To use like that language of emptiness rather than saying that something is inherently trash. Remember, emptiness is this lack of inherent existence. Remember that from your exam, right? So rather than saying that something is inherently trash, we can say we have to deem it trash, right? We have to come in and call something trash. And we talked about the process by which we might do that. You're going through your refrigerator. Actually, I did this the other day. I had some old produce in there. It's starting to get like brown and kind of, you don't want to eat that produce anymore, you know what I mean? And so, you know, of course I throw that in the trash. Obviously, Joyga and Roshi would yell at me and say, you could do something with that. And I would say, yeah, but I live in an apartment in the city. What am I going to do with crusty old, you know, rotten old vegetables? So in any case, yeah, the process by which something is labeled as trash, right, is sort of what we were getting at, is how do we mark things as trash and then throw them out and get them out of our lives? And then we took that process and applied it to people, which was kind of an interesting process too, right? How are people labeled as trash, as unfit to be members of our society? We talked about incarceration. It's not the only way that people are labeled as trash, right? Sometimes they might be dragged on the internet or something like that. And then finally, we thought about ourselves, didn't we? Right? We applied this to ourselves. How do we take parts of ourselves and label parts of ourselves or our actions, maybe our bodies or our personalities, right? How do we take parts of ourselves and section them off and say, actually, I don't like this about myself. Trash, right? Let's get rid of it. Let's change it. And again, I think the more we draw attention to that process, the more meaningful it becomes. We torture ourselves in this way. I don't know about you guys, but the more I think we are aware of the processes involved in what to say, self-dissatisfaction, self-esteem. I think the more illuminating this process becomes, right? These are choices we make. Whether we're consciously doing it or not is another question. But we label parts of ourselves and we say, this is not as useful. I want to change that. And again, for better or worse. So that's a little bit of an overview of There Is No Trash. Again, you can write a paper about this if you think these are interesting ideas. What did I say for the prompt? Connect it to the greater vehicle, right? So just like I said, you could connect it to emptiness if you think that philosophical aspect of it is interesting. There's also, we could say, an ethical or compassionate kind of side to this too, right? Where you're looking at people not as trash, but as human beings. And so you can make quite a few arguments, I think. And then finally, Buddha nature. And so maybe we can even look at this together. You probably already looked at this before, but page 29, for example, I don't know if we quite got to these quotes when we were discussing it. There's sort of an abrupt break. And this is one question I thought I could begin today's class with. We have this story about the trash and the rocks and the leaves and the dirt and all that sort of stuff. And then it skips. And we've got this line that I have here. It's Shakyamuni Buddha, right? So that's Siddhartha Gautama. Hopefully that terminology is not too confusing. Now we know there are many Buddhas. Who's another Buddha? Do you remember the name of any other Buddhas? Who's the one we pray to if we want to go to the Pure Land? Do you remember his name? It's an important name. If you know this name, it's your ticket to the Pure Land. It might not be in my exam, but it'll be on life's exam when it comes time. Life's final exam. What's the name that will get you to the Pure Land, guys? Does anybody remember? Amitabha. Yes, very good. So there's Amitabha Buddha, and this is a different Buddha. This is Shakyamuni Buddha. And so now you can kind of get a sense like, oh yeah, lots of Buddhas. It's important to differentiate them. This is the same one that we read the biography of, right? This is Siddhartha Gautama. After he becomes a Buddha, people call him Shakyamuni Buddha. And just to be clear, you can choose one of three languages. There's probably, actually, no, there are more. There's Tibetan language too. So Amitabha, Amida, Amitofo, and then in Tibetan, it's Tsepakme. There's Lupakme and Tsepakme. And yeah, so Amitabha is Tsepakme. He's also very common in Tibetan tradition. So anyways, coming back to this, Shakyamuni Buddha, wonder of wonders, intrinsically all living beings are Buddhas endowed with wisdom and virtue. Only because they cling to their delusive thinking do they fail to realize this. What concept is Shakyamuni Buddha talking about here? So again, intrinsically, all living beings are Buddhas, endowed with wisdom and virtue. Only because they cling to their delusive thinking do they fail to realize this. Does this remind you of any greater vehicle doctrine that, again, you could write a paper about if you're interested? Connor's got it. Buddha nature. Buddha nature, yeah, exactly. So how is this Buddha nature? We all have this enlightenment inside of us. We just fail to realize it, right? We cling to our delusive thinking. We fail to realize this. And so perhaps it's not a huge surprise. How does this there is no trash doctrine line up with Buddha nature? It's worth spelling out. What do you got? Does anybody want to make this connection? What does Buddha nature have to do with there is no trash? It might seem sort of obvious on the surface, but it's actually kind of profound when you dig into it. And I think, again, that's the value of this image, this idea, is because it lets us dig into Buddha nature and think about what does it really even mean to have Buddha nature, right? Who wants to make the connection? Maybe I'll see the chat is awake. Well, Connor obviously is, but so how does there is no trash connect to Buddha nature? Because again, as we read this chapter, there's just a little break in the paragraph. We have the trash thing, and then all of a sudden Buddha nature. So clearly Morinaga thinks there's a connection, but he doesn't really spell it out for us, right? This book is a little bit let's say, implicit in some of its connections. It asks the reader to make connections. And so that you have to, again, you have to think about it, right? And it is actually a useful book for writing papers and that sort of thing, because it gives you a lot to chew on, but then you have to digest it for yourself, to give a little eating metaphor there. As you're thinking about this, there's a nice line right under that. I attained Buddhahood together with all the grasses, the trees, and the great earth. So again, this is Shakyamuni. How do we make sense of this? Can grasses and trees achieve enlightenment? This is actually a bit of a koan. And on the face of it, the answer should be no, right? Why would like early Buddhists say that grasses and trees cannot achieve enlightenment? Have we talked about grasses and trees achieving enlightenment before? I'll answer that for you. We have not, right? So why not? Why not? Why can't grasses and trees achieve enlightenment, at least from one perspective? Everything in existence is necessary. Okay, I like that. Grasses and trees, what do you guys think? We live in like a nature spiritual world here where we associate nature with spiritual realization. And even in some Japanese traditions, a lot of people in the West, when they first started studying Eastern traditions, they're like, look how natural these traditions are, right? They look at things like Shinto, where they talk about spirits in the trees and that sort of stuff, or special divine trees, and they say, look how natural these religions are. So that's one way we can interpret this. But really, early Buddhists would say trees cannot achieve enlightenment. Why not? Who can achieve enlightenment? Bodhisattvas, okay. Who can be a bodhisattva? Anybody? Does it have to be human? Does it have to be human? Again, we haven't totally talked about this. Say it again. You have to take a vow, that's true. Well, let's say I take a vow that I'm going to help all sentient beings, but then I get hit by a car and then I'm reborn. Am I necessarily going to be reborn as a human? Not necessarily. What else could I be reborn as? An animal. Totally possible. Bodhisattva dog. Can you imagine it? What would a bodhisattva dog be like? Do dogs ever like help save people and animals?
Well, I mean, yeah, there's some of the dog stories of like the dog saving someone but it makes me think of the wheel.
The wheel.
You could argue that they're like on the path to the thing, I guess, or just like on the path.
Exactly. Yeah, very nicely stated. So Jocelyn said she was thinking about that wheel, cyclic existence, samsara, right? And how there are 6 different kinds of beings that you had to memorize for your exam. Remember that? See, this is why I make you memorize things. It's because if you memorize things, then you know things. If you don't memorize them, then you don't really know, do you? Right? And so, yeah, like Jocelyn said, you could be a human, you could be an animal, and if you're on the path to enlightenment, you could be an animal bodhisattva. Why not, right? They're just in a sort of slightly different circumstance. And there are a lot of stories actually about the Buddha in previous lives where he's reborn as a monkey, he's reborn as a whatever, and he does good stuff for his monkey friends. There's actually a really nice story, if I can remember it correctly. He's a monkey king, and the monkeys need to like cross this gap for some reason, and he like uses his own body to make a bridge across the gap, and all the monkeys walk over his back, something like that. So anyways, there are lots of stories where Shakyamuni Buddha, before he was enlightened, was a virtuous animal of some kind. You could be a virtuous hell being, for sure. There are stories about that too, where the Buddha is like in some sort of horrible hell realm where he's like being treated like what are they called? A beast of burden. He's like carrying a bunch of stuff. He's being whipped and tortured and that sort of thing. And he looks over at the other beings in hell and he thinks, oh, I hope that they're not suffering too much. I wish I could, do something to help them suffer less, even though he's in like searing pain and being stabbed and all this horrible stuff. He's still thinking about how can I, aid these other people who are in searing pain and being stabbed. And so this little thought, again, was part of his trajectory toward enlightenment. So yeah, all kinds of beings could be bodhisattvas, gods, demigods, humans, hell beings, ghosts, animals, right? Those are the 6. Correct? Yes. So that was not a trick question. Did I say trees? We didn't say trees, right? If you're not a tree, how could you be a bodhisattva? These 6 beings are called sentient beings. Remember that term? It means they have a mind. Do trees have minds? For the Buddhists, no, they don't. For scientists now, there's sort of interesting conversations about this. Have you guys read about this at all? I'm not a scientist, so I don't really know, but things about like playing music for plants somehow alter their growth. And obviously if you have a light, some plants grow toward the light, right? And so it shows that they might have sort of, I don't know, dare I say, a desire of some kind. And some might say, no, this is just some very natural process where they happen to grow in that direction. But there is at least some conversation about some form of sentience for trees. If this is an interesting conversation, so you can look into that. And so coming back to this line, it's actually pretty surprising when the Buddha says, I attained Buddhahood together with all the grasses, the trees, and the great earth. This feels a little unorthodox, right? For the Buddha to be saying, I achieved enlightenment together with the grasses and the trees. How do we make sense of that? Can anybody make sense of that? Because again, obviously, if the Buddha is saying it, clearly people are taking this seriously. I just gave you all these reasons why he should not be saying this, and yet he is, right? How do we make sense of the Buddha saying he achieved enlightenment with the grasses and trees? And what does that have to do with the idea that there is no trash? Now I'm just piling the metaphors on top of each other. Anyone want to take a stab at it? It's not an easy question, right? We're just getting into sort of interpretation, which is really the topic for today. We're going to talk about koans in a moment, which I think we mentioned those before. Did I mention those before? I think in the intro part, I used that word for you, but I didn't go into any detail. So again, in some ways, this is a bit of a koan, that the Buddha achieved enlightenment with the grasses and trees. Anybody want to take a shot? No? Connection to there is no trash. Really, what this whole slide is about, what this whole chapter is about, is boundaries. Is one way to think about it. Boundaries, right? That's sort of a pop psychology term, right? What does it mean to establish boundaries? Have you guys heard that term before? What does it mean to establish boundaries? People say that this is a healthy thing to do, right? Emotionally speaking. What does it mean to establish healthy boundaries? Usually talking about you and someone else, right? How do you establish a healthy boundary between you and someone else? Nothing? You guys have unhealthy boundaries in your relationships? How do you establish boundaries? What does it mean to do that? It's an interesting word, actually, boundary, because you're not physically like creating a wall, right? This is our healthy boundary for this class. I stay behind the plastic glass, and you guys are safe for me and all of my germs. How do you establish boundaries? What does that mean?
It's to set limits of things that you're willing to accept and not willing to accept.
Okay, very nicely stated, Sam. Thank you. Set limits about kind of what you do want to do, what you don't want to do, right? And this is important for romantic relationships. maybe for obvious reasons, but it doesn't have to be, right? It could be for work relationships. It could be for friendships, right? People ask things of you. They need your help sometimes, right? Do your friends ever need your help? Sure. What are friends for, right? That's why that's the saying, is because friends are there to help each other. It's a big part of friendship. But at the same time, if a friend always needs help, you guys ever have a friend like this who always needs you, even when you don't really want to help them, or even when you can't help them, right? Has that ever happened? This is where you establish your boundary and you say, I can't do that for you. I'm sorry, right? I would love to, not today, at least. Maybe call me back in a couple weeks. We'll be done with the semester. We can return to this topic. And so anyways, this is, what it means to negotiate boundaries, establish boundaries. And again, when we think about this word boundary, it really is talking about this, isn't it? A physical separation, something where you put that thing between you and your friend. And the implication is almost like when you don't have these boundaries, you've sort of tied up your one being in a way, right? You're together with them in a deep and intimate way. And sometimes if that is draining or difficult for you, you have to put up the plexiglass to protect you from that relationship. And so this chapter is really about boundaries. But is this about establishing boundaries? Trash requires a boundary, doesn't it? I am over here. I am good. I am useful. The trash is over there, is on the other side of the boundary. Anything that is on that side of the boundary is gone. And so this is not about establishing boundaries, is it? This is about dissolving boundaries. Or at the very least, turning them into porous boundaries. What does it mean to have a permeable boundary? Yeah, that's a good biology term, right? A cell wall is permeable, isn't it? I took chemistry classes. I was a chemistry major. Okay, maybe this is enough. But just to come back to this grasses and trees thing, what the implication is with Buddhahood, and you guys are, well, maybe you are, but I don't know. But if you're not enlightened, establish your boundaries. I don't mean to say don't have boundaries, but if you are enlightened, the implication is that there are no boundaries. There are no boundaries with enlightenment. Have I told you this? The Tibetan word for enlightenment is to expand and purify. This is a word I think about all the time because it's not clear why that is the name of the term. But to expand, right? To expand beyond all of these boundaries, to include all beings. Not even just all beings, everything, include everything in one sense of self, right? There is no gap between the Buddha and the rest of the world. And to purify, I suppose, is to not just expand all these boundaries, but to bring enlightenment beyond one's self, right? And so this idea of achieving enlightenment with the grasses and trees, the implication is the Buddha sees enlightenment in all things. It's not like they are some individual tree out there that has enlightenment and I need to go learn from the tree or something bizarre like that. It's more like the Buddha's enlightenment is so expansive that it encompasses all things, including the grasses and trees, including the sentient and the non-sentient, right? So anyways, that maybe was more time than the payoff was worth. But again, you can write about this chapter. There's a lot to be dug out from here. And we see there's one last little piece to it. We've got the trash story, we get the Buddha nature story, this idea of expansive enlightenment. And then finally, kind of a weird little anecdote about desires, where Morinaga is in conversation with, he calls her a young woman, an ardent believer in Christianity, who basically says, hey, isn't Buddhism all about throwing away your desires? Does that remind you guys of a question I put on the exam, where I very meanly said, do Buddhists think you should get rid of all desires? And the answer is no, they don't think that. The Buddhists do see value in some desires. And some of you guys tripped up on that, even though if you just took a quick glance at the review sheet, you would see that wholesome desires was one category for the Buddhists, right? So it's a common misconception that the Buddhists say we should get rid of all desires, but it's also relevant to this there is no trash conversation, right? if early Buddhists ever wanted to identify something as trash, what would it be? It would be the filth covering the statue, right? It would be the stinky flower covering the Buddha statue. What is that filth? How do the Buddhists interpret that filth? What is that trash for them? What is the filth covering the golden statue? You guys know this. Come on, don't be shy. What is it? Very good. Thank you. And so if there is trash in early Buddhism, it would be the negative emotions, wouldn't it? But here, in these few paragraphs, it's allowing us to rethink even that. Even that trash is not trash. This very early image that your negative emotions are trash, get rid of them. And so how does he express it? So at the end of the paragraph, I think, yeah, it's on here. Buddhism points out that after all the seeking, what we attain is the realization that what we have sought was already from the first already ours. After all the pounding away, we awaken to the fact that the door was already open before we ever began to knock. And so it's this idea that it's not to say that we should revel in our desires, right? We usually feel like we have this choice where it's either you give in to your desires or you resist them. You guys ever feel this way? Whether you want to admit it or not, my guess is you do, right? This is how the world is structured around us, is you either are disciplined and you hold fast and you do your homework, or you give in and you go hang out with your friends or whatever, right? Watch some video on YouTube for a few hours. What this is saying is this is a false choice, right? This is a false dichotomy. There's another way to think about it. And what he is saying, you might not believe him, but what he is saying is that the realization one might want to look for is a realization that what we have sought was always from the first already ours, which again is Buddha nature, right? Is that this thing that we desperately want, this satisfaction that we are looking for, that Mick Jagger can't get none of, is not out there over a hill, right? He's saying it's already here. So how do we connect all of these? It doesn't seem obvious at first, but I would argue a lot of it comes back to boundaries. To label something as trash, you must put a boundary up. When you put a boundary up between you and your desire, you feel like it's not here, you need it, you want it. But when you learn to take those boundaries down, you open yourself up to all the things you thought you were missing out on, right? So this really, it is a chapter about boundaries. And again, Freudian psychologists might not approve of dissolving them, but of course, they're not, most of their patients are not Buddhists either. Okay, questions about this? Okay, we can go through the next stuff sort of quickly because I've already used up a lot of class. This is kind of a cute story. One thing I like about it is, I think it's a term we've talked about before. There's this term about having the scales drop from his eyes on page 34. It's, you know, we don't have to read it, but basically, so again, Roshi is like, hey, did you look in that alcove? You remember the story, Brendan? You want to tell it? I'll give you a second to compose yourself. No, go ahead.
Go look in the alcove, and Mornaga is like, oh my God, what am I in trouble for?
Yeah.
And then he just looks in the alcove and doesn't see anything. Goes back to Roshi, and Roshi's like, did you look in the alcove? And he said, yeah. And then Roshi said, did you see the dew? And he did not see the dew. So whatever it was.
The dew.
Yeah.
Do the dew. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So here's the character for dew. And there's also a flower, right? It's like a rose of Sharon. Yeah. Well, it's both of them. Yeah. And why is dew important? Let's see what it says. When a Zen monk writes the word dew, it is not the natural phenomenon that he refers, but to direct revelation. And so I think this is it's a play on words where this is the character for dew, like the droplets that appear outside in the world. I'm not actually sure what the revelation character would be, so I feel a little inadequate in answering this. But I think it is a play on words where these are similar characters. Perhaps they're pronounced the same in Chinese, something like this. I could look into it if you're curious. But yeah, so because he was so worried about getting in trouble, he's like, "What did I do wrong, Roshi? I didn't see anything wrong." He's like, "Did you look at the plant, or did you look at the flower and the scroll? Isn't it beautiful?" He's like, "Oh, I didn't notice," because he's so worried about getting something wrong. And so when he realized that, you know, his anxiousness was sort of clouding his vision, right? Remember we talked about mirrors and dust and clouding your vision, all that sort of thing. He felt like the scales had dropped from his eyes. And of course, he's not talking about the scales of justice, right? Let's look up scales. So not these sort of scales. What's an animal that has scales? Dragon scales? Yeah, these kind of scales. Imagine your eyes being covered by scales. You guys ever feel that way? And then having them drop off. It's a beautiful image. And again, what is this book about? It's an ongoing lesson in the extent of my own stupidity. These are the moments where the scales drop off of your eyes, right? Is when you realize that you did not see clearly before. But of course, it doesn't mean you're incapable of doing so. Confucius, you guys ever heard of him before? So maybe this is surprising that Confucius would show up. I don't think we've talked about him in this class at all, but Zen is important in East Asia. I guess if I haven't explained this before, Zen is a Japanese word. It basically just means meditation. That same character in Chinese is called Chan, C-H-A-N. And in Sanskrit, that term is dhyana. And we've actually talked about this before. It's from concentration meditation. Maybe you remember you can enter in these trances, and there are higher and higher levels of trances. And actually, a lot of you wrote about this on your exam. I think it's, you know, is in the slides or something, but about getting extrasensory perception and all that sort of thing. Maybe that rings a bell. And so as you get it deeper and deeper, these levels of meditation, you have various realizations and that sort of thing. That's what this word is for Zen, is referring to those levels of trance, of realization. So in any case, but when Zen comes to East Asia, it, let's just say, mixes with the traditions that were already there, and it starts to refer to something new. And one tradition that's already in East Asia is Confucianism. So it shouldn't come as too big of a surprise then that these influence each other. And part of what makes Zen what it is today, we could say, is uniquely East Asian, and that's why Confucius is here. Again, we don't have to go through all the details of this. I just want to give you some of the takeaways. I think this is actually kind of an interesting one with belief, doubt, and determination. If that's something you're interested in writing about, this is a helpful story. So Confucius is talking to one of his students, Gen Yu, which I think in a different way of writing it'd be Ran, I want to say. Sometimes Chinese is written with in different ways. You don't have to worry about it. So anyways, let's just call him Gen Yu. And so Gen Yu looks at his classmate, a guy named Yan Hui. He's like, "Oh, that classmate of mine's so smart and so capable. I'm kind of an idiot. I'm never going to be good as my classmate," right? And from the face of it, that might sound like he's being humble. Do you guys ever try to be humble? I feel like humility is not actually a big part of our culture in America. Would you guys agree with me? We tend to prefer, we talked about arrogance last time, didn't we? And how if you're arrogant, there's sort of limitations on that. But we actually do appreciate arrogance in this country, right? It means you're strong, it means you're capable. I don't know. We talk about Trump, he's a perfect example, right? Part of the deal, the smartest guy in the room, the strongest guy in the room, the cleverest, the richest, the most powerful, right? That's what we like. We like that sort of stuff here. We might feel a little guilty about liking it. And so you get the weird sort of humble brag, right? I'm sure you know about humble brags, where on the one hand, you might look like you're being humble, but in reality, you're sort of being arrogant. It's this bizarre flip of humility into a form of arrogance. It's sort of a strange state of affairs that we live in. But in any case, coming back to this idea of humility, this guy is sort of feigning humility in a way, right? He's basically saying, oh, that other classmate is so much smarter than I am. I will never be as good as him. And rather than praise him for being humble, right? Because humble is sort of a virtuous way to be, Confucius really lights him up. And he's like, lack of ability is an excuse for those who have at least tried, at least come part way. But you, before even setting out to try anything, you set limits on your own ability. This is not humility. It is nothing more than self-cherishing self-defense. Self-cherishing self-defense. And so what this makes me think of is, how should we be humble then, right? Just like, how can we believe in ourselves and not be arrogant assholes? That's an important question. How can you practice humility without becoming sort of a weak twerp, you know? These are both very important and I would argue related questions. And Confucius hits the nail on the head here, right? Have you guys ever been in a situation where maybe you're playing a game, or it's relevant in class too? I see this all the time this semester, actually more than most, where it's just like, well, I could either try and maybe succeed, but if I start to not succeed, I'm just not going to try. Right? Because again, if you're playing this game and you're losing at the game, it's not fun to lose, right? And so you say, all right, I'm not even going to play. And then if you apply it to this class, then maybe you'll get a bad grade or something, but you have a little layer of self-defense, right? The self-cherishing self-defense. The self-defense is, I didn't even try. Because I didn't try, that's not my real grade. It doesn't really apply, right? Because I didn't try. It keeps me safe. It lets me sleep at night, right? It doesn't reflect on your own shortcomings, right? It saves you from having to reflect, maybe I'm not as smart as I thought I was, right? It saves you from having to face those very difficult kinds of thoughts because you didn't try. And because you didn't try, you will never know what would have happened if you had tried, right? Have you guys ever been in this situation before? I certainly have. Right? When I was growing up, I felt like those were basically the choices, is you either play and you succeed, or if you fail, then you're just like, well, I didn't even try. So, you know, it's not like I failed. It's just like, I didn't try, right? And so this is really what Confucius is hammering right now, is he's saying, you must try. Jian Yu, or whoever his student is talking to. And I think, you know, coming back to this idea of how do you develop a sense of determination, this is the opposite of determination, right? Is where you kind of get stuck in this self-cherishing self-defense. You're protecting your little vulnerable self and thinking, well, if I don't try, then I will never be hurt by these feelings of inadequacy. Whereas if you do try and you fail, you will get hurt. And it sucks to be hurt, right? But of course, this is all part of the process of success, is you have to try and fail. You must, right? You must. And so part of this tradition, again, is giving you the tools to be able to withstand the sting of failure. Okay, and there's more about kids trying to light a bath. That's sort of a cute part too. Again, it's about failure, right? About kids being incapable of helping. I don't know if you guys have ever, like, when you were a kid trying to help your parents make dinner or something like that, and you just sort of get in the way, and they're like, okay, wash these vegetables, and you're like washing each vegetable like one by one, and it's very inefficient, and you're probably not actually helping very much, something like that. So that's sort of what we see here, right? We have all these incapable little foolish children, but also there's sort of a moment of tenderness too, right? We see Confucius being super strict and really intense, but there's this moment of tenderness at the very end where Morinaga says, but I cannot get angry at young people like this because I was exactly like them at one time, right? And thinking back to when he was a stupid little kid who didn't know how to do anything, and he had to learn in this way too, right? It's a helpful thing to reflect on as we get mad at each other. And again, we could bring it back to this idea of boundaries, right? When we think, here I am the smart teacher and I'm surrounded by all these idiots all the time, right? When we break down these boundaries, we can remember like, oh yeah, I wasn't always a smart teacher. I used to be an idiot too, and I used to make a bunch of stupid mistakes. And in fact, you know, let's be honest, I still make them now. And so, this is a complex tradition that is on the one hand quite intense, but on the other hand also allows for these moments of understanding too. Okay, this is what I really wanted to get to, was koans. Have you guys heard of koans before? Is this a term in your vocab set? It's an English word. We use this word. You could find it in the English dictionary. I guess we could look it up. Koan, a paradoxical anecdote or riddle used in Zen Buddhism to demonstrate the inadequacy of logical reasoning and to provoke enlightenment. It comes from Japanese, matter for public thought. That's not a great translation. And from the Chinese, gong an, which official business, also not great. But yeah, it's a public record. So these are from, the term literally has the sense of like, this is a record of an exchange between an official and a person, basically, and it comes from kind of bureaucratic documentation. So it refers to an exchange between a teacher and a student. The teacher gives a riddle, a puzzle, and asks the student to kind of figure it out. And I have a little worksheet I prepared. I don't know, in the interest of time, maybe it's not even worth doing. I have some video clips too I was thinking of showing you. So why don't we do the video clip? You guys like video clips, right? So let's do this, and then we can kind of go through the worksheet thing together. So this is a movie that if I didn't already give you a movie for about the tea, right? What did the teacher say about the tea? And so how do we make sense of this one? Can you interpret that for us, Jocelyn?
Yeah, so trying not to spill it would be trying not to, like, ruin or like hold or like trying to hold on to whatever it is that he can't enjoy it while it's there.
You guys ever feel this way?
It's kind of like, what is it? Like you don't know it's good until it's gone or something like that.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, if we expand this out to life in general, and obviously I'm open to you guys' thoughts too, but you know, right now, we're all stressed out, we're all a little tired, right? Just holding on, just trying to get through the exams, just trying not to mess up life, right? Just trying to pass on through. But just like this koan, we could say this image illustrates, this riddle, what are we missing if we live life this way? Obviously, we can do it for a week or two, whatever. It's not so bad. But let's say we live life every day this way, right? You're missing the flavor of the tea all of a sudden. You're missing the flavor of life. And, you know, clearly this was a monk. He's not saying, you know, go out and get hammered or anything like that. But there is room for meaning, for enjoyment, right? For space is maybe one way to put it. Even when you're stressed out, even when you're struggling to not spill the tea, right? It's important to sort of keep perspective. So yeah, two brothers, two very different personalities, two very different approaches, and so the two very different teachings too, right? Kind of tailored for them. I'll show you this worksheet. Let's not go through it in groups, but we can look at it together. I've just put some koans together. They're very important in the book. What I would have done is kind of let you loose on page 44 and page 99. And again, let's just do it together. What do these koans do? We just did it for the hassa, hassa, right? Hate, hate, hate. I don't know German, but the way he said that is kind of penetrating, right? What are these koans meant to do? We just did it for the two brothers. How do they help practitioners reimagine themselves and the world? How would you respond to these koans? So here's a weird one. Kill the Buddha on page 44. I looked this up. If you meet the Buddha, kill him. This is sometimes if you meet the Buddha in the road, kill him. How do we make sense of this? So what is this koan meant to do? What's your initial response? How does this make you feel when you read these Buddhists saying, if you meet the Buddha, kill him? Adobe is the worst. Kill the Buddha? How dare you, Morinaga? How dare you? What does this make you think, Brendan?
Has something to do with our body is just a physical form. So learning from Buddha, you have to release it in the physical form.
What's wrong with trapping the Buddha in a physical form? Is this talking about how we should really go out and kill things? Is that the message we're being sent here, Ellie? Mm-hmm. I like that. So Ellie is asking us to imagine this a bit more interpretively, and I think that's an important step to take. These are not like literal instructions that you are meant to follow. Nobody's telling you to kill the Buddha. Let's just be clear about that. Although, yeah, quite literally, that is what this says. So I guess I shouldn't say nobody. But yeah, I like what Ellie is doing, right? This is something we need to interpret a bit more carefully, right? And so that's what we're trying to take apart here. I see you guys are opening your books. I'll give you a little light. And so if you go to this page 44, Morinaga even gives you some advice about how we can interpret this. It's alarming, isn't it? I mean, if you take this seriously, especially if somebody is a Buddhist, a devout Buddhist who takes Buddhism seriously, to hear your teacher tell you to kill the Buddha is alarming. It's supposed to be alarming, right? If it's not alarming, then, you know, it's not really doing its work. It's supposed to wake you up a little bit, right? Make you feel like this makes me uncomfortable. And Morinaga takes it even further. He puts stuff like kill your parents, kill the ancestors, kill your father, kill your mother, right? And I think the reason he does that is because that is even more alarming, right? For maybe a non-Buddhist audience to hear something like that, it's like, oh my God, Morinaga, how could you say this to me? And by this point, we would have kind of been into the book a little bit. There's maybe a little bit of belief, right? A little bit of trust that Morinaga is not literally telling us to go out on a murdering spree, right? And so we end up kind of where Elliot is asking us to go. Let's think about this symbolically, right? A symbol of the Buddha. Why would we want to kill a symbol of the Buddha? What would that do for us? Why would that be part of Buddhist practice, to kill a symbol of the Buddha? What's wrong with having a symbol of the Buddha? How could that lead us astray, potentially? Away from enlightenment rather than toward enlightenment. Do you remember, I showed you that picture of the monk tearing up the scripture? You remember that? Last class? Why was the monk tearing up the scripture? It's kind of a similar energy, isn't it? Did we answer that question? Or did I just pose it and we moved on? Why was the monk tearing up the scripture? What was the point of that display? Kill the Buddha. What are we killing? What is the monk tearing up? He's not tearing up the wisdom of the Buddha, is he? Can that be contained in a page? Paper and ink?
I think what we talked about last class, at least with the monk tearing up the scriptures, we said it was more important for Buddhists to like follow the teachings and like actually make an understanding of it and live it in their lives rather than just reading about it. It's not as proactive.
Yeah, I think that's the main idea. I like that, Catherine. Other thoughts? Anybody want to add to that? this feels a little overstated. It's a little extreme, but again, that's the point, right? It's supposed to be weird, surprising. And if we take this and apply it to something like our beloved parents, right? What are the things that we hold on to in this world, right? That kind of bind us and cause us problems. One thing, if nothing else, this is reminding us that the Buddha can die. Is this contrary to the Buddha's teachings? It's not, right? The Buddha died. That was a whole chapter of that book we read, right? We spent a lot of time talking about the death of the Buddha. It's a big part of his teachings. And he even basically indicates, like, I could stick around longer if I wanted to. He chose to die, right? He chose to demonstrate impermanence, right? So on the one hand, it's forcing us to think about death in general. It's also forcing us to think about killing. You know, as a virtuous person, very rarely do I think about killing, but this is forcing me to kind of mingle with these thoughts of being a killer. And then, you know, coming back to Catherine's point, it's saying don't hold on too tightly to whatever it is you think the Buddha is, right? Because again, that's more of a distraction than anything else. The point is to live your life in an enlightening way, right? It's not to have a t-shirt that has the Buddha on it or something like that, right? Okay, maybe that's enough of that. There's a more interesting one. Show your original face before the birth of your father and mother. What do you guys think about this one? Your original face before the birth of your father and mother. What does this make you think of? Again, we could apply the same questions. What is it meant to do? How does it help you reimagine yourself and your world? How would you respond? Like, let's say you're in the room with that teacher and he says, show me your original face. Would you guys be able to do it? Game face? What is your original face? You don't actually have to show me. You're welcome to. Maybe I'll keep, if anyone wants to turn on their camera and show me their original face, you're welcome to. Brandon, what do you think?
I kind of like this one a lot because Leonardo said that he couldn't trace back the beginning of his life, really. Like, he could really go back to his father, his parents, and so on, so on, so on, until like you get a time to not really pinpoint a start to your life. So his original face, I guess, before that, but in his physical form right now, he's riddled with ego and everything along that path. So his original face would be his most pure, egoless self, just like his spirit or soul, I guess.
Okay, pure, egoless self. That's pretty good. And I like the way Brendan was thinking about it. If you guys, for those who are following along at home, if you couldn't hear, Brendan was going kind of up the chain, right? That's what this asks you to do. Is it asks you to kind of reach back in time and think, what is my original face? It makes you think about your face. You guys ever think about your face? In this age of selfies, of course you do, right? We have to think about our faces all the time. What is my face? Is my face just my face of today? 10 days ago, was my face the same face? Probably pretty close, right? A year ago? 2 years ago? Maybe you had a different haircut, slightly different structure. 10 years ago, very different face, right? Would you guys agree with me? And so as you kind of think about this lineage of your face, and that is what it's asking you to do, right? Your original face. And you go back to your face when you were first born. You probably didn't know what it would look like, but maybe you've seen pictures. You can imagine. Cute little baby face, fat cheeks, that sort of thing, right? And then it gets weird, right? And then all of a sudden you're in the womb and maybe you go back far enough, you're just like little cells floating around, right? You have a face? When does your face become your original face, right? Where do you draw the line? Is it when you pop out or is it before you pop out? Probably before, right? You have a face, but at what point can you pinpoint, this is when my face begins? But the question isn't even asking that. It's before the birth of your father and mother. What? Right? And so then you start to think about your parents' faces. do I look more like my mom or my dad? I kind of look more like my mom, honestly. Sort of has a big head, sort of smaller face. My mom kind of looks like that. When I grew up, I used to have a mustache. I could have a mustache now, you wouldn't be able to tell, but my dad has a mustache. And when I had a mustache, I looked kind of like him. So it makes you start to think about your parents' faces. And then their faces change over time. I don't know if you're aware of this, but your parents are not stuck in time. They're changing too. This is one of the really weird things that happen when you become an adult, as you begin to see your parents change. And you can imagine them going back in time, especially with picture technology. You've probably seen your parents' faces from way back in the day, back when they were your age, maybe, right? And so then, even before then, they used to be little babies, because we're talking about before they were born. And so we can keep going back and back and back, because their faces didn't come from nowhere, right? Their faces came from their parents' faces. And this is, I found sort of a goofy thing from Tricycle, which is just this magazine, where they kind of take this back through evolution, right? Of course, the monks of Zen from 1,000 years ago weren't thinking about this, but going through Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo sapiens, and kind of tracing back through the genealogy of evolution, right? That's something we could do too, right? Think about all the various faces of our ancestors and their ancestors back to that fish who figured out how to flop onto the land and start walking around and all that sort of stuff, right? So you can do some pretty freaky stuff with this one, right? What does this have to do with Buddhism? We've touched on some Buddhist topics. What do you think? Can anybody make the tie? We can go back to this initial question. How does this help practitioners reimagine themselves and their world? How does this become a Buddhist practice? Show me your face, your original face before the birth of your father and mother. And if you look at the exchange on page 99 or thereabouts, they mean show the face. They don't mean just think about it, right? This isn't just some light activity. Let's see, page 100, yeah, the next page. Going beyond the self that we distinguish on the basis of small differences in facial features and personalities and abilities. What is the original and constant true self, right? So it takes this idea of a face and then starts to apply it to the self. Everyone at least eventually realizes that this is the question of the koan. This is my real form. Almost inevitably, he starts out proffering all manner of empty theories. In due course, however, this is the third paragraph. In due course, however, the teacher will shout, I'm not asking for explanations. Get rid of your theories and show me your original face. The monk winds up at his wit's end. I don't know if they quite finished the thought. It's sort of a frustrating exercise, actually. You're almost doomed to fail. I just imagine like a room of monks making faces at their teacher. Can you imagine this? Again, with masks, it makes it a little bit of a less interesting exercise. But who can give a good explanation? I know the monk in the reading does not want an explanation, but what are we looking for here? What's the point of this exercise? Are we supposed to find something? Can we find our original face? Is that the point? Is the point that we cannot find it? Why would that matter? Morinaga connects it to a true self. Haven't we talked about finding true selves and inherent existence and all that kind of stuff? This gives you a taste of emptiness, right? The emptiness of who you really are. Because again, in this age of selfies and online representation, you are your face. And you can freeze that face in time. It's kind of an interesting time to be a person in the world, right? It wasn't always this complicated where you're constantly constructing selves on the internet, right? This is a new era. And so this is a reminder, right, that there really is no true self. There is no true face. And when you try to find it, you'll get lost in the sands of time, right? You will kind of get lost as you look for it. And so you could argue that the point of this exercise is to not find the faith, right? To sort of abide in emptiness. But I would push against that. I think that's part of the exercise. But again, the teacher wants to see it. The teacher wants to see your true faith. And so what would the true faith be for these monks, for Zen? Well, it really goes back to what we started with. It goes back to Buddha nature, right? Can you show your true being, right? Can you show Buddha nature in your faith? Interesting question. I would argue maybe, right? Maybe you can. I guess we're out of time. So for your homework, you can think about what would your true faith look like? So this is koan practice. And again, Morinaga ties it in with doubt and determination. On 44, he makes this connection. So again, belief, doubt, and determination show up. You believe that there's something to be gained from these weird puzzles. You doubt that you really understand what it is. That's sort of the point. You're like, what? It's that, right? It's a very humbling experience in a way, but you want to know, right? And again, this is that determination is wanting to kind of close that gap. Okay, we're out of time. Any last thoughts or questions or anything?